It was a warm Saturday afternoon at Emerald Hills, an upscale gated community known for its pristine lawns and towering mansions. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of silence that only wealth could afford. David Brooks, a young photojournalist in his late 20s, pulled into the driveway of his rental townhouse. He parked his modest sedan, grabbed his camera bag, and headed toward the main entrance. His phone buzzed with a text from his editor. The text from the editor said, "We're waiting for those shots, David. Don't keep us hanging." David groaned. He was already late, thanks to a mix-up at the studio earlier. "Just grab the camera charger and get out," he muttered to himself as he fished for his keys. Before he could unlock the door, a sharp voice rang out behind him. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" David turned to see a woman in her 60s storming toward him. Her tailored floral blouse and gold-rimmed glasses screamed wealth and entitlement. Her face was a mask of suspicion. "I'm getting into my house," David said, holding up his keys. The woman crossed her arms. "Oh, really? And who exactly are you?" David blinked, confused. "I live here, Unit 5B. Her eyes narrowed. "Do you? Because you don't look like someone who belongs here." David glanced down at his jeans and sneakers, then back at her. "I didn't realize there was a dress code for residents." The woman ignored his sarcasm. "I'm Claudia Marshall, head of the Emerald Hills Homeowners Association, and I know for a fact that the tenants here don't dress like you." David chuckled, though there was no humor in it. "And what exactly does someone who lives here dress like? A mannequin at a high-end boutique?" Claudia's nostrils flared. "You watch your tone. I have every right to question anyone who doesn't belong." "Ma'am," David said, exasperated, "I'm not breaking in. I live here. Ask the management office." Claudia whipped out her phone. "I'll do just that." As Claudia tapped furiously on her phone, her husband Richard stepped out of their mansion across the street. "Claudia, what's all this yelling about?" She pointed at David. "This man claims he lives here, but I've never seen him before. Probably a squatter or worse." Richard, a burly man with a perpetual scowl, walked over. "We can't be too careful. Call security, Claudia." "Already did," she replied triumphantly. David sighed. "This is ridiculous. If I didn't live here, how would I have the key?" He waved the key card in front of the building's sensor, and the door beeped open. But Claudia wasn't convinced. "That doesn't prove anything. You could have stolen that key." "You've got to be kidding me," David muttered, stepping inside. "No, you don't," Claudia snapped, grabbing his arm. David recoiled, glaring at her. "Don't touch me." Richard stepped between them, his broad shoulders blocking David's path. "You better explain yourself, buddy." "I don't owe you an explanation," David shot back. The tension was interrupted by the arrival of the community's security officer, Greg, a lanky man in his 40s with an air of perpetual exhaustion. "What's going on here?" Greg asked, looking between the three of them. "This man is trespassing," Claudia said immediately. Greg looked at David and then at Claudia. "Mr. Brooks lives here. He's on the tenant list." Claudia's jaw dropped. "That can't be right." "It is," Greg said, glancing at his clipboard. "Unit 5B, been here for 6 months." "That's impossible," Claudia insisted. David crossed his arms. "You just can't wrap your head around the idea that someone like me lives in your fancy neighborhood, can you?" Claudia's face turned red. "How dare you accuse me of racism?" David cut in. "If the shoe fits." As the argument heated, a small crowd of neighbors began gathering. Among them was Lisa, a young mother with her toddler in tow, and Kevin, a lawyer who always seemed to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. "What's going on here?" Kevin asked, stepping forward. "Mrs. Marshall is accusing Mr. Brooks of trespassing," Greg explained. Kevin sighed. "Again? Claudia, how many times are we going to do this?" "I'm protecting the neighborhood," Claudia snapped. "From what? A hard-working tenant?" Kevin countered. David turned to Greg. "Can I go now? I have work to do." "Not so fast," Claudia said, pulling out a small canister of pepper spray. Everyone froze. "Claudia, put that down," Kevin said sternly. "No, he could be dangerous," Claudia cried. David took a step back, raising his hands. "Lady, if you spray me, I swear." Before he could finish, Claudia aimed and pressed the nozzle. David ducked, but the spray caught his shoulder and part of his neck. He stumbled back, coughing and rubbing his stinging skin. "Are you out of your mind?" Kevin shouted, grabbing the spray from Claudia's hand. Lisa, meanwhile, called 911. "We need police at Emerald Hills immediately. Someone just assaulted a resident." When the police arrived, David was leaning against the wall, still trying to catch his breath. Claudia stood defiantly, insisting she was the victim. "Officer, I was protecting the neighborhood," she said. "He attacked me." The officer, a no-nonsense woman named Sergeant Harris, raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, several witnesses say you attacked him with pepper spray." Claudia sputtered. He was acting suspiciously." "Suspicion isn't a crime," Harris said flatly. She turned to David. David hesitated,
"Do you want to press
looking around
charges?"
at the neighbors who had defended him. Finally, he shook his head. "No, I just want to get back to my life." Claudia smirked, thinking she'd won. "But," David continued, "I'd like it on record that she harassed me and assaulted me unprovoked." Sergeant Harris nodded. "Understood." She turned to Claudia. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for assault." "Turn around." Claudia's smug expression vanished. "You can't arrest me. I'm the head of the Homeowners Association, and I'm the head of law enforcement," Harris replied. As Claudia was led away in handcuffs, David couldn't help but feel a small sense of vindication. Kevin clapped him on the back. "You handled that well. Better than I would have." David smiled faintly. "Thanks. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a story to tell." He pulled out his phone and began typing a text to his editor saying, "Forget the photo shoot. I've got a better headline. Privilege and Prejudice in Emerald Hills."